We're taking the fight directly to the sinister criminal cartels, and we're showing them no mercy. We are doing numbers like nobody thought possible. Even the Admiral, he would say that he would have never thought this was going to happen to the extent that it's happened. Our message is clear. You will not threaten our citizens. You will not poison our children. And you will not infiltrate our borders. We will find you, we will stop you, and we will put everybody that we find behind bars if you're lucky.
Letitia, yes, I can tell you that the FBI action took place around 7:30 this morning right here inside this building. It's the Legislative Office building that you see over my shoulder, and also wanted to show you it is directly across the street from the state capitol. Now, KCRA 3 has learned that today's raid by the FBI is directly related to the ongoing investigation.
It started at 4:18 a.m. That was the first moment the black SUVs turned into the quiet federal housing block just outside the city line. The street was still asleep, porch lights were off, window blinds were drawn tight, a cold wind moved through the empty cul-de-sac, rattling dry leaves along the curb. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that one of the most devastating internal betrayal cases in recent memory was about to explode behind a perfectly ordinary front door. Then the convoy stopped. 3 dark SUVs parked nose to tail without sirens. An unmarked van cut across the rear alley to block the back exit. Another vehicle held at the corner, watching the street in silence. By 4:22 a.m., the house was fully surrounded. By 4:24 a.m., agents were in position at the front porch, the side gate, and the sliding rear entrance. No warning shouted for the neighborhood, no dramatic chaos for cameras, just whispered commands, gloved hands tightening on breaching tools, and the kind of tension that only comes when the target inside is not just dangerous, but trusted. At 4:26 a.m., the breach signal came. At 4:27 a.m., the front door gave way. At 4:28 a.m., agents rushed inside. Lights flashed across the hallway. Boots slammed against hardwood. A voice yelled from upstairs. Glass shattered somewhere near the kitchen. And within seconds, the target of the raid, a DEA agent accused of secretly selling witness identities to a cartel, was pulled from his bedroom, thrown to the floor, and ordered to show his hands. For years, he had worn the badge. For years, he had attended briefings, reviewed sealed files, and heard the names of people who risked everything to cooperate with federal narcotics investigations. For years, he had looked like the kind of agent other agents trusted. But on that morning, investigators believed something far darker. He had not been protecting witnesses. He had been delivering them. By 4:32 a.m., his service phone was seized. By 4:35 a.m., a second phone was found wrapped in a t-shirt inside a bathroom vent. By 4:39 a.m., agents recovered printed case summaries from a locked desk drawer in the home office. At 4:44 a.m., they found handwritten notes hidden inside an old tool chest in the garage. Initials, dates, safe house references, hotel codes, transfer windows, and cryptic marks that made no sense in any lawful DEA workflow. That was the first moment the raid shifted, because this was no longer looking like a dirty agent who tipped off traffickers about drug loads or surveillance teams. This looked like something colder, something more personal, something far more deadly. At 4:49 a.m., forensic teams opened a concealed flash drive taped beneath the underside of the office desk. At 4:53 a.m., the first file preview came back. Witness movement records, protected cooperator references, relocation details, interview summaries, sealed identifiers that should never have existed anywhere outside secure federal systems. At 4:58 a.m., the lead command official inside the mobile unit said the phrase that would define the case: witness identities sold, not leaked, not mishandled, sold. By 5:04 a.m., the suspect was placed in restraints and moved to a transport vehicle. By 5:11 a.m., emergency notifications were already going out to surviving witnesses connected to cases he had touched. By 5:18 a.m., internal case control teams had begun freezing every file he had accessed over the past 2 years. And at 5:24 a.m., the number at the center of the investigation was spoken aloud inside the command van. 12 informants killed. 12. That was the count investigators were now linking, directly or indirectly, to witnesses and cooperating sources whose identities may have been exposed through the dirty agent to cartel handlers. 12 people who had talked, 12 people who had trusted the system, 12 people who had believed the government could keep them hidden, 12 people who ended up dead. By 5:31 a.m., secondary teams were hitting a storage unit, a downtown apartment tied to an intermediary, and a second vehicle registered to a relative. By 5:30 4:43 a.m., digital forensics teams found message fragments suggesting coded communications with cartel-linked brokers. By 5:57 a.m., the first emergency witness relocation was underway, because by then, everyone in the command structure understood the same terrifying fact. If the agent had really been selling identities, then some people still alive were already in danger. That was the morning the betrayal finally broke open. But the betrayal itself had started much earlier. It started in the quiet world of federal access, databases, sealed files, internal memos, protected movement schedules, debriefing notes, and the ordinary invisible machinery that keeps informants alive long enough to testify. The dirty agent did not need to break into anything. He did not need to hack secure servers or infiltrate the system from the outside. He already belonged inside it. That was what made him so valuable. He knew who the real witnesses were. He knew which cooperators mattered. He knew who was low-risk noise and who was the kind of source a cartel would kill to identify. And according to investigators, he had slowly turned that access into a private business. Publicly, he looked exactly like the kind of officer no one would suspect. Quiet, experienced, professional. He knew how to sit through sealed briefings without ever seeming too curious. He knew how to open a file for a reason that sounded normal. He knew how to move through interagency spaces where trust was automatic and scrutiny was low because everyone in the room already had a badge. That is the terrible strength of betrayal from the inside. It does not always look reckless. Sometimes it looks disciplined. Sometimes it looks like competence. Sometimes it looks like the man you would least expect. Investigators first began noticing something was wrong when too many witnesses connected to sensitive cartel cases started collapsing under suspicious circumstances. One source vanished shortly before a scheduled transfer. Another cooperator was located despite being moved under sealed arrangements. A third witness's family was threatened with details no outsider should have known. One killing could be written off as cartel reach. Two might still be explained by bad luck, personal mistakes, or leaks somewhere in a broader chain. But 12? That was no coincidence. That was pattern. That was architecture. Analysts began reconstructing every compromised witness timeline against secure access histories. Who viewed the relocation logs? Who opened the debrief summaries? Who touched the files in the days before a witness disappeared, was threatened, or was killed? At first, the suspect pool was wide. DEA personnel, task force officers, support analysts, prosecutors, partner agency staff, anyone with a legitimate reason to be near the information. But over time, one name kept surfacing at the edge of too many disasters: the DEA agent. Sometimes he accessed the files and nothing happened. Sometimes he accessed them and days later, a witness was compromised. Sometimes the overlap was tighter. Hours, not days. Enough to turn suspicion into dread. Because the pattern no longer looked administrative, it looked deliberate. Then came the financial irregularities. Not mansions, not exotic cars, not the cartoon version of corruption. That was the clever part. He had been careful. According to investigators, the money came in fragments. Debt quietly paid off, casino markers settled, travel expenses indirectly funded, transfers spread through relatives, small investments routed through shell consulting entities, cash that never sat in one place long enough to look dramatic. That is how corruption survives. Not by being loud, by staying just small enough to be ignored until the blood starts tracing back to it. And in this case, there was blood everywhere. The cartel did not need him to move cocaine. It did not need him on the street. It needed him inside the witness system. That was his value. Because a dirty federal agent who can separate real cooperators from background noise is more useful than 100 low-level scouts. He can tell a cartel who is dangerous, who is talking, who is being protected, and where pressure needs to be applied. The information does not just destroy cases, it destroys lives. That was what made this case so much worse than ordinary corruption. A tipped-off raid loses evidence. A leaked shipment loses leverage. But a sold witness identity turns trust itself into a weapon. It means every future informant will wonder whether stepping forward is the same as signing a death warrant. It means every prosecutor trying to build a cartel case has to fight not only the traffickers, but the fear that someone inside the system may already be for sale. And fear is one of the cartel's most effective tools. According to the case theory, the breakthrough came from an unrelated narcotics operation where agents seized a cartel courier's phone. Buried in deleted fragments were coded references. Hotel numbers, initials, date clusters, route notes. At first, the codes looked meaningless, but analysts cross-matched them against sealed witness movements and realized the fragments lined up with protected relocation events. That was the first real crack. Then another came from financial tracing. A relative of the DEA agent had received unexplained funds through a shell business with no real clients and no legitimate commercial history. Those transfers lined up with time periods shortly before two major witness compromises. That coincidence triggered deeper review. Phones were mapped, access logs were narrowed, secure file activity was reconstructed to the minute, and once investigators laid all of it over the timeline of the killings, the picture became nearly impossible to dismiss. The same man kept appearing, the same file access, the same hidden money, the same destruction afterward. By then, the internal teams handling the case had become extremely careful. A corrupt DEA agent with access to protected witness identities is not just another target, he is an emergency. Every extra day gives him another chance to sell someone out. That is why the raid came before sunrise, why his devices were taken first, why secondary locations were hit immediately, why witness relocation protocols were triggered before the case ever became public. Because once betrayal reaches the witness system, delay becomes lethal. The evidence recovered from the house reportedly deepened the horror. Files that should have existed only in secure federal channels had been printed and annotated. Coded notes seemed to classify witnesses by importance. One hidden document listed initials alongside dates and geographic shorthand investigators believed referred to safe house or transit locations. Another file suggested he was tracking which witnesses had already been handled and which were still open. That language chilled investigators, because it suggested the people in the files were no longer being seen as human beings under federal protection. They were inventory, targets, products, something to be priced and sold. By midday, the fallout had spread across every agency that had worked with him. Supervisors were rechecking years of case access. Prosecutors were reopening sealed matters. Surviving witnesses were being moved again. Informant handlers were reviewing every unexplained threat, every vanished source, every relocation that somehow failed too neatly. Even honest agents who had worked beside him were now being forced to confront the ugliest possibility of all. The cartel may not have found some witnesses through luck or reach. It may have bought them from inside the building. That was the real institutional damage, because federal narcotics work depends on trust in ways the public rarely sees. Witnesses trust handlers. Handlers trust secure systems. Prosecutors trust access limits. Agents trust that the people in the room are there to protect the case, not monetize it. Once that trust is contaminated, everything becomes harder. Cooperators get quieter. Cases weaken. Fear grows. The cartel does not just gain the death of one informant. It gains silence from the next 10. That may be the most devastating consequence of all. By afternoon, investigators were expanding outward from the agent toward intermediaries, money handlers, and possible additional corrupt contacts who may not have known the full scale of what they were participating in. Some might have believed they were moving ordinary case leaks. Some may have known exactly what the identities were worth. The evidence would determine that later. But one fact was already impossible to escape. If 12 informants were dead, then the betrayal was not theoretical. It had consequences measured in bodies. 12 families shattered, 12 warnings sent into the underworld, 12 signals to every cartel target considering cooperation that maybe the government could not hide them after all. That is what the cartel was really buying. Not just information, deterrence, fear, the destruction of belief. As evening fell, forensic teams were still working through the seized devices. Emergency witness reviews were ongoing. More names were emerging from message trees and payment flows. Prosecutors were building what would likely become one of the most explosive public corruption cases in federal narcotics history. And hanging over every sealed file, every safe house, every informant meeting was the same question. How many more were already marked before the raid finally stopped him? At 4:18 a.m., the house looked like any other federal townhouse before dawn. By 4:58 a.m., investigators were openly calling it a witness identity sale operation. By 5:24 a.m., the dead were being counted at 12 informants killed. And by the end of the day, the image of a trusted DEA professional had collapsed into something far darker. A man accused of taking the names of the hidden, the vulnerable, and the desperate, and selling them to the very cartel those people had trusted the government to help them escape. The door was breached, the files were seized, the survivors were being moved. But one question remained hanging over every witness room and every narcotics case he ever touched. How many lives were traded before the badge finally stopped protecting him?